Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Party SLO Talk. My name is Enrique Jauregui. I'm the SLO coordinator for Fresno City College, and I am pleased to be joined by the California Assessment Coordinators Hub, also known as the coaches, who will be assisting us in moderating the discussion. Coaches, could you kindly introduce yourselves?
I can go next, I guess. Hi, I'm Michelle Dunbar at California State University, Dominguez Hills. I'm an integrated assessment and accreditation specialist in academic affairs, and so happy to be here with you all.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Benny Ng from Los Angeles Pierce College. I'm the College Outcomes Coordinator.
Good morning. My name is Bethany Tasaga. I am math faculty out of San Bernardino Valley College. I'm also the curriculum faculty co-chair and outcomes faculty lead. Good to be here.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jarek. I'm the founder of the Friday SLO Talks. And I just would like to take a second to tell you how thrilled I am to announce that we are concluding a really remarkably successful semester. Over the past few months, we have delivered 10 two-hour webinars, each focusing on topics crucial to the assessment of student learning. The discussions have emphasized, as you may remember, Bloom's taxonomy, relevant to rubric creation and assessment, curriculum and instructional design, equity and program review, the impact of artificial intelligence and climate change on higher education institutions, the implementation of Canvas, and even an in-depth case study on mathematics. This last topic revealed how thorough assessment can complete the learning feedback loop, leading to enhanced instruction and learning. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to all members of the California Outcomes Assessment Coordinators Hub, or coaches, for their unwavering, persistent support in making these webinars possible. I'd also like to express my gratitude to all the guests and presenters for their invaluable contributions to our discussions. Building on the foundations laid by this work, I believe we are in a strong position to address the issues of social change and learning. Our focus will remain on understanding what students expect from higher education institutions and on how we can better involve the communities we serve in the learning process. On this note, I'd like to pass the microphone to Enrique. He's going to introduce today's guests and the discussion topics.
Thank you. Before we do that, for those who may have arrived late, the live webinar will be available just outside the main room. If you are encountering any technical difficulties, please do not hesitate to notify us. We will do our best to assist you. So also put your name, where you're from, in the chat, please. Our first presenter is Tom Haymes. Tom Haymes is an author and consultant and teacher. He's currently an innovator in residence of Arizona State University. The discussion will be AI breaks industrial systems of education, but not systems of learning. Many of the systems we take for granted, such as grades, credit hours, transcripts, and credentials based on those metrics. Industrial technology systems, the purpose of the exploring assessment methods based on these standards. He's been an author and writing many books, if I can say that, Tom. Excellent author in Arizona. So, Tom, would you like to introduce any further? Can you say more about yourself if I have missed anything, part of your educational and your visions in the educational system?
Well, no, that's great. I mean, I've written a couple of books. I've probably written more in blogs than I've ever written in books, but and other forms of short things. And I'm also a photographer. I'm very much into let's look at the world in a lot of different ways. Before I was I'm innovator in residence for the Shaping EDU project at Arizona State University, one of the innovators in residence. And what I do there is I work on systems for helping people connect tasks to tools. So, I think one of the problems we have with technology is we don't really think through what we're actually trying to do before we run out and grab a hammer, and or someone sells us a really nice hammer that suddenly we need a screwdriver and things like that. And so a lot of times that creates all sorts of problems. I used to be a technology director at a community college, and I have been teaching at the community college level for over 20 years now. So I definitely see the world somewhat from that perspective as well. And please don't hesitate to share any questions you might have or stop me along the way. I've been teaching on Zoom for 3 years now. Nothing much throws me as far as online is concerned. So yes, I do have slides, and I will flip those on here. But I do have a formal presentation. I'll call it a conversation starter, and I'm going to go through some things fairly quickly, and let me make sure I can. Of course. Okay. Now it's going off on its own. Sorry. Okay. So you just got a sneak preview there. I'm going to go up and down the ladder here a bit because we all operate within systems. We just don't always realize them. I also want to go back in history a little bit and think about where these systems come from. And because, again, there's a lot of things we take for granted, some of which are not really been around for all that long, and encourage us to think about how the current environment may be forcing those systems to change. And oh, by the way, this is not a new story. I could have given this presentation a decade ago. It's just has gotten more urgent in some ways as we go down, and we still haven't adapted a lot of things, but I'll come back around to that in a minute. Okay. Yes, and I will be sharing my slides in the Miro as well as my slides are easy to get. But of course, one of the things I like to say about presentations and sharing slides is that all too often, you think about it, you're kind of sharing the set for friends without any of the actors, and slides are just a background for the performance of the presentation. And so the recording in some ways is going to be much more useful to people. But okay, but really quick, I have created a little sandbox, and won't let me copy that. Right. Okay. If you go to the link bit.ly/Friday SLO talks, that will open up a Miro document. Feel free to play around in that in the background while we're going through this stuff. And just knowing that, we'll come back to some of the things and think about how you might use a tool like that in a learning environment where you're trying to do assessment as well. Okay, so going back to history, this is, of course, Raphael's famous painting, School of Athens. We have to remember that up until about 200 years ago, this was education. Of course, people were not in robes anymore at that point as much, but the basic format, the technologies involved, you had a very artisanal educational system where, people would go to, if they went to college at all, when they went to college, they would go and work with a particular professor or maybe a small group of professors. The colleges had a better collection of books and stuff. I mean, you went to read at Oxford because that's where the books were. So that's where the information was. And this was very much the norm up until the mid-19th century. And the question is this what we're trying to go back to, or is this what we should be trying to go back to? So I'll plant that thought in your mind as we go through kind of a little bit of a history here. It all goes back to the blackboard. And, the reality is the blackboard was a very revolutionary technology because in the 19th century, it allowed people to scale education in a way that wasn't possible before, because you have these little slates and stuff, and those existed before then. They go actually all the way back to Roman times, but suddenly you could have a much larger classrooms. At the same time, you started having this growth of industrial revolution, and there developed a need for managers, leaders, scientists, engineers, lawyers, and the elite to become educated, and we needed to scale that up. And so you saw a scaling up of universities, the creation of land grant universities and colleges in the late 19th century. And when you scale this up, suddenly assessment becomes an issue, because before this, your assessment was basically when your professor said, when your teacher, whoever that was, said you were good enough to go and take the bar exam, you could be a lawyer. And that was actually still the case for quite a while. You didn't actually have to have a law degree to take the bar exam, for one example. But that's also, you learn medicine, other engineering, and so on and so forth. When your mentor said you were good enough to do it, then you were good enough to do it, and then you went out and worked. But when you scale that up, suddenly you may not know your mentor in quite the same way. And the problem with that is now you need some sort of assessment mechanism to test a lot of people as opposed to just one or two people. A lot of the legitimacy of this system in the early years was based on institution. Again, still a fairly small elite who's getting educated at this point in the game. And so you said, I'm a Yale man. I got a degree from Yale. Yale has blessed me, or Princeton or whatever. And that was enough to get you the job. And but those institutions within them required more effective assessment. And so that's where you start to see this assessment, and grades are a natural consequence of that. I mean, how are you going to weight that assessment versus other assessments, or what other professors are doing, and so on. Grading systems are not all standardized at this point, but at least you could measure progress within the institution. It wasn't in the early 20th century that we started to see transcripts. So the outside stimulus that drove that first revolution was the Industrial Revolution. Then the next big stimulus was arguably right around World War II, or World War II itself. You started seeing, if you read Vannevar Bush's As We May Think, it's something I think everyone should read at some point. Written right at the end of World War II. Vannevar Bush was the guy who ran the scientific programs for the United States for President Roosevelt, including things like the Manhattan Project. And his problem was that the technology was getting so sophisticated, suddenly you needed more and more people who were able to do this science, you were able to do these sorts of things. Coupled with that, you had this mass return of veterans from the war, and there was a generalized feeling that we needed to educate more people, that we needed to, and that also from an equity perspective, of course, that equity only extended to Anglos at this point for the most part. But we also needed this from an economic, scientific revolution perspective, that we needed to get more people into college. And that's where you started seeing this idea of the mass higher education developing in the 50s and 60s. And of course, Sputnik was another stimulating. All these things sort of kicked the system forward. But at the same time, you have these technologies that are starting to come to the fore. You have standardized transcripts where people start to agree that grades, an A is an A is an A. Although exactly how that gets there is certainly still a matter of mystical ideas in many ways. You had the mass adoption of projectors, which had been around since the early 20th century, but suddenly a projector is a much more effective tool than a blackboard in terms of you can make things much bigger. So suddenly, instead of a room with maybe 80 to 100 people in it, you can have a room with 300 or 400 people in it, which became somewhat of a necessity when you started getting thousands and thousands of these veterans and others coming into university systems. You had the development of mass assessment. The ubiquitous Scantron was invented in 1946. And so suddenly, because that developed, okay, so we got to grade all these people. We need systems to do that. And then parallel to this, you had the first computers showing up in university environments in the 1950s. And then certainly by the 1960s, they'd become fairly widespread, but these were fairly limited computers. And so the grading systems had to conform to the needs of the technology. So they're pretty simple. That's where we get sort of 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 systems, because I could put down all your grades pretty simply in a relatively small data set in a computer, share that information within the institution, but also theoretically share that information with other institutions in the form of transcripts. And suddenly you become a data point, right? Because when you start massifying things, you start also depersonalizing things. And so this became more and more of an issue as time went on. Initially, people didn't really have near as much of a problem with it. There were a lot of loopholes and ways people skated through the system, et cetera, et cetera. You started having the growth of these much larger institutions around this time. And that, again, creates its own logic and logistical things. And these were driven in part by technologies. So this depersonalization started to become a real serious issue in the 1970s, arguably. Early, if you look at Ivan Illich's work in the early 70s, he starts talking about how this idea of schooling becomes disconnected from the idea of actually learning anything. And at the same time, in parallel, you start personalizing these computing systems, starting with personal computers, eventually going to the internet, and then more recently, Web 2.0, which I think is a real turning point that a lot of people overlook. And AI, is just the latest chapter in what I call the mass knowledge systems. So now you suddenly got technologies that allow people to learn, share, exchange information, separate from formal institutions. And so you see a lot more a growth of informal learning. You see a growth of another parallel industries because the amount of effort, time, expense, whatever you want to call it, to spin up a new university or a new educational institution gets a lot easier because you get these online colleges and things like that. These things start to undermine the centrality of higher education in many different ways. And so the response by higher education in many cases is to say, okay, well, we're better at being job creators and training people for job. And then this idea of assessment turns into the idea of credentialing. And so now instead of simply saying, hey, I'm a Yale man, is good enough, now all of a sudden you've got all these other institutions that want to say, I'm as good as a Yale man, I'm as good as, or whatever. And so, but you start having this parallel thing of external rewards. And this is built up on the whole grade system that emerged in the early 20th century as a logistical expedient, was simplified in the mid 20th century to handle computers. And all of a sudden you have this external jackrabbit that everybody's suddenly chasing. And the learning falls by the wayside, to be honest, because we have this period, certainly in the early 2000s, where you've got all this the legitimacy issue, but where state legislatures and others are asking both K-12 and higher ed to suddenly go, hey, you know what? We're actually teaching something here, right? And so we're going to give this test to prove that we're teaching something here. And so that becomes the credentialing thing. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is that the students get pulled into this system. They've learned in K-12 for sure, but certainly in college, that the goal is not learning, the goal is getting the degree. And anything that happens along the way is kind of incidental to that. And at the same time, you get this loss of meaning and this loss of identity, and people just are going through the process to get that college degree. And so you start seeing this fissure opening up, and there's a lot of things pulling it in different ways, but the system is being pulled apart in many different ways. And a lot of times you don't see this until years later in retrospect. If you're a student of history, when did the Russian Empire fall? Was it in 1917? Well, arguably it fell in 1905 or earlier than that, because you start seeing these fissures in retrospect if you study the history and you think about them. But if you're a Russian in 1910, you go, oh, we still got the Tsar, everything's good, yeah, we got this Duma, it's okay, but so that's I always caution people to think cautiously about the present moment in time, because we lack a certain amount of humility from history. about where we are. So now we find ourselves in this situation. Most of higher education is based on the technologies or evolutions of the technologies that are in the red circle in terms of information technologies, in terms of technologies that not only convey information within the context of teaching and learning, but also convey information in the context of your achievement, your credentialing, et cetera, et cetera. And those are largely built on those pre-1950s technologies, because we still use the 4-point grading system or some variation on that. We still use mass assessment quite frequently. We have our projectors. They're digital now, but it's the same thing. I remember when I was a technology director 15 years ago, and people would come up to me and go, "Oh, I use technology in class. I use PowerPoint." And I'm like, explain to me exactly how different that is from the transparencies used to sit on the projector. From a functional perspective, yeah, it's prettier and you can do some neat tricks with it that you couldn't do. But in many ways, what I'm doing right now, I could do on a blackboard. You wouldn't be able to read it because my handwriting's so awful, but you know, there's no functional difference between what I'm doing now and what could be done on a blackboard from 1850. Assuming a certain level of artistic skill on my part. We've lowered the barriers to creating this stuff, but that doesn't mean it's fundamentally changed. So the reality, though, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, is that the world has evolved in this way with these information technologies, the personal computer and personal computing devices and the things that evolved from that, the internet and all its forms and shapes and guises, Web 2.0, which is the reason I point out Web 2.0 is that this allowed everyone in many ways. You didn't have to be a technician to create content. So suddenly it was a lot easier to share content. And guess what got shared? Test answers, among other things, right? Essays, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this made all of that whole industry, whatever if you want to call it that, possible, because suddenly you didn't need to know coding to put things on the internet. You could do it with a lot of different, like we're doing now. I didn't code Zoom. So that's a critical thing. And AI, generative AI, which is what we're seeing right now, there's different flavors of AI, and we can go into a lot more detail. And there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, so to speak, going on around AI right now. It's kind of hard to get I was just reading something Brian wrote a few minutes ago where, it's really hard to see what's going on in many cases. And there's definitely some thoughts there about how the technology should evolve and the issues with the technology. But I'm talking about the AI that you and I and our students can access today. And really what we're talking about at that point is generative AI. ChatGPT being the most famous example, but there are others growing out of that, Midjourney, et cetera, et cetera. But this is yet just another creative tool in many ways. Just like the word processor or Photoshop, it's just gotten so much easier to do this sort of thing. It's easier to write. Writing is hard, so getting the AI to write for you for some people is a godsend, right? You still have to be able to edit, but we see this disconnect. And so what's happening is that the credentialing is coming into question. You're starting to get, state legislators and other players in the game are really questioning the efficacy of college. What are these people doing? Let's end tenure, blah, blah, blah. You've got students who are shifting into other modes of learning. So again, bringing back my friend Brian, 10 years ago, this graph on the top left here is what we thought was going to happen with education. This was from 2013. Oh, look, we got this big bump in the 60s, got a little bit of a dip in the 90s, but all's good. After the 2008 recession, everybody went back to college and the trend is up. Brian's been watching this for a decade. And from a purely demographic perspective, that was never going to be sustainable. There's simply fewer and fewer 18 to 24-year-olds, and the reality is that's who we pitch our wares to. So, there's a number of challenges that come out of that. But the other thing that's happening in parallel, it's not the only thing that's demographics is not the only thing that's driving this, but you see this emergence of a rejection of college. And that's what this, the Wall Street Journal article from a few weeks ago, is college worth it? You've got 60% of people and 60% of 18 to 34-year-olds. That's our market. That's our audience. Those are the people we want. And there are fewer of them to begin with. Remember that too. And on top of that, they're going, this isn't worth it. We're getting taught things, assessed things that don't really connect up to the world in which we live. They're using technologies, from the previous slide, the big innovation that colleges have basically done is they said, oh, well, we've got PCs and we've got the internet. Cool. We can have bigger lectures that are online. I mean, that's essentially what most far too many online courses amount to, is people doing what I'm doing right now for an hour a day, 3 times a week or whatever, twice a week for an hour and a half, whatever, and saying, okay, I'm teaching, right? And of course, there's all sorts of problems with that as well. We can talk about how the different technologies interact with each other. Students are like, why would I do that? Why would I spend money to do this? I'm not learning anything useful. I'm getting a credential out of it, but increasingly people are going, do we really need this credential? Is there a cheaper or better way to get this credential? Why would I go through this if I don't have to? And so we're seeing this persistent enrollment decline. The other part of the demographics equation is for the higher education to maintain its current enrollment levels, there's only one real answer, and that is to expand the customer base. What we're seeing in terms of that right now is that the expansion of the customer base is going down. So we're seeing this surge in dual credit. And I personally think that the reasons behind this are twofold. One is you've got K-12 institutions that are being deprived of funds and they need people to teach these courses. You've got colleges that are looking for places to put their professors who, because they don't have the enrollment, they're losing enrollment. And so what's the easy answer? You teach the same course to high school students instead of the 18 to 24-year-olds, and you've expanded your customer base. That's kind of one of those, I'm trying to think of the analogy, but there's a point at which you're just sort of doing the same thing and you're Wile E. Coyote off the cliff at that point. You're spinning your wheels and eventually you're going to run out of helium and you're going to go down. That's a limited market. The real answer for higher education is that we need to expand upward in our customer base from the usual traditional college students. Also, we can expand outward to people who wouldn't normally go to college, but doing the same thing is, in a slightly different way is not really going to be good enough after a while, because we're seeing this, what I call the disconnect between what people are really looking for and what they get. Now, does that mean turn college into a job training program? Well, Chris Newfield, who I cite on various places, he says that's our mistake, is that we treat if we start treating college like it's a job training program, there are better ways to get job training than go to college. Much cheaper, more targeted ways. If you really want to teach people, and community colleges have already done this. It's called Workforce. And you take a certificate that takes half as long or a quarter as long, and you get your electrician's training or whatever, HVAC or whatever you're doing, or your mechanic or whatever. Now, the problem with that education is it's keeping it evergreen is a real challenge over time, because those technologies tend to change. So a lot of them do much faster than they used to. So what do we do about this? Well, here's the dark future. I call this the Elon Musk future. You get into a system where you've got a very decentralized learning environment, where all sorts of institutions are providing that job training that in a much more efficient, effective manner than higher ed can ever hope to. And instead of having holistic entity, you've got all these little fractured things. You got companies doing their own training. You're already seeing this stuff starting to happen today. You got company, because Google knows what Google needs out of its employees. So why not have Google teach its own employees, right? Assess its own employees, because if you're good enough to get through that. Now we're back to that old apprenticeship, mentorship thing. There's actually nothing wrong with that per se, but it doesn't replace what I would call the central elements of a college education. But the problem with that is you learn in silos and you learn with blinders on. You learn what the employer wants you to learn and nothing else. You lose that larger picture. And employers will compete with each other on this. And so if you go to Microsoft and you get your certification at Microsoft, then you want to go over to Google, then you may have to start over with that whole training process, because you've only learned how to do things the Microsoft way. And now you have to learn, that's always going to happen anyway, but that'll get worse. You'll have a lot of independent operators, you know, people learning on their own, et cetera, which again, there's nothing wrong with that. Ben Franklin learned on his own. He didn't go to college. Most people recognize him as a great scientist at a certain level. So, you know, and we have the tools to do that in a way now that we're not, you know, that were difficult even 50 years ago. So, yeah, it's already there. Train with Google, exactly. But we start losing this cohesion, right? And AI, by the way, can help with this because it makes all these things so much easier. Because what AI is doing is right now is it's a giant vacuum cleaner for information. And it I was at a talk yesterday and the speaker, and I've totally zoned on his name and I apologize for that. He said, what AI does is it gives it meaning. You know, Google, you have the information. AI stitches it together in a theoretically meaningful package, right? And so I don't need it. That's what a professor does, is stitch together information in a meaningful package to their students. That's what a teacher does. So why do I need it? Why do I need the professor? He's a lot more expensive than the AI, right? So that's the kind of world that Elon Musk is looking at when he makes statements like the one that I've quoted here on the slide. You know, they're not for learning; they're for credentials. And if nobody cares about the credentials, you're basically hosed at that point. You're an empty shell as an institution. Now, the elite institutions are going to be less susceptible to this kind of pressure because what they're selling is a network. But as much as community colleges and regular, you know, the reality is that the alumni network at a community college or even at a public commuter college, like, you know, a lot of the UC system schools or the University of Houston or someplace like that, their network is going to be nothing like the network at Harvard as far as who's, you know, got those upper level jobs who can give you a job, right? So that's one vision of the future. This is another vision of the future, far more hopeful one, because we have at our disposal a range of creative technologies that allow us to transcend those industrial models, that allow us to think very differently about how we're managing the business of teaching and learning, how we communicate achievement and learning, things like that, that were not available to someone in the 1960s or 70s. And yet we don't leverage those capabilities to try to change the environment in which our students are learning. Now, I'm not going to pretend to have all the answers here. This is an evolutionary process. We have to play through a lot of different scenarios, and it's also very artisanal. We're going back to that kind of model. And so every school, every discipline, and oh, by the way, disciplines are a problem for undergraduate education. Graduate school, they kind of make sense, except for very specialized disciplines. For undergraduate, the real world doesn't work in those silos anymore. You're not going to be just an engineer anymore. You're not going to be just a teacher. To be a teacher, you have to be a polymath anyway. It doesn't matter what you're teaching. You know, how do you teach English without reference to history, for instance? I mean, that's always a problem. But we've got very used to these silos. AI can help us with that. You know, again, it helps us pull all this stuff together. and we can stand on the shoulders of AI instead of being replaced by AI or any technology for that matter, and use that as a way of expanding the possibilities across the board for teaching and learning, as well as assessment. We have technology that's so far beyond a 1950. I mean, the phone on my belt here has, and I just geeked myself, but that's okay. The phone on my belt here has more computing power than any mainframe in 1965. A Raspberry, they did a test a few years ago, a Raspberry Pi, which is a $35 chip on a board, right? Beat out a Cray supercomputer from 1986, you know? So we've got all this power now. Let's use it, right? We don't use most of it. And we need to develop a set of generative learning. Now, I have played with some of this stuff. And before I get into that a little bit, I will talk about some of the things that I've done myself as a teacher to try to leverage technology as much as possible. But there are real constraints. We operate within a system, and the systems are entrenched. I don't have any illusions about this. As teachers, as coordinators, as you know, the foot soldiers, so to speak, in the teaching and learning game, there's a limit to what we can get away with. And a lot of what we can control has to do with things like assessment and grades. And I'll talk about, you know, ways to deal with that. But there are larger issues that we should be aware of and we should be pushing on. You know, this idea of enrollment, you know, how much enrollment and management, certifications, what do those look like, transcripts. These are things we should be advocating for with our institutions, because they're largely under the control of administrators, the accrediting boards and things like that, which we have a voice in, but do not necessarily control. And they're going to require more collective action. And then the larger idea of the place that education has within society. Is it a job training program, or is there a larger purpose that we've kind of lost sight of? Again, Chris Newfield really talks to this a lot in his Great Mistake book. But this idea that, you know, we need to be thinking about, you know, how this stuff fits in, because frankly, a lot of the attacks on higher ed come because of the weakness that people perceive in the system right now. They can get away with it. Nobody's going to step up and defend the institutions who are quote unquote charging too much for tuition and so on and so forth. So Donella Meadows has this great system. There's a lot of different ways of looking at systems. And I like Donella Meadows' system because it's fairly easy to grasp and work with. And it's something you can teach your colleagues as well. And there's a link to her leverage points. And it's just an article. And it's a short article, but it'll make you think about things a lot. And basically she identifies these 12 leverage points in any system. And the ones at the bottom end of the spectrum here are easy to do, but have a relatively small effect on the overall system. Just because I changed my grading rubric doesn't mean that my school is going to rethink how they assess what a grade really means, for instance. Much less are my students going to think differently about how college works. My biggest problem with my students is the fact that I do things so differently in my classes that they're like, well, wait a minute, how does this relate to how do I get an A in the class, or how do I pass the class, right? And so there's a lot of conversation that has to happen with that. If the system were set up differently, I wouldn't have to deal with that problem, but I do. And that's just the reality of things. At the other end of the spectrum are these much bigger ideas about what college is and what higher education is. Those are much harder to shift, even within the institutions of higher ed itself, and getting the people to think differently about what we're here for, okay? But also the larger picture. How do you get Governor DeSantis to think differently about what the Florida schools are there for, right? Or what they actually are doing, right? And those kinds of questions. That's a bigger question. Those things are harder to shift, but you kind of have to work your way up the ladder. You can't, the more you go at the top of the ladder and say, this is all wrong, we're going to erase everything and start over from scratch. You can't erase 150 years worth of history. It's just not going to happen. And going back to the Russian Revolution thing, the people changed in the Russian Revolution, but at the end of the day, Stalin was every bit as autocratic, if not more so, because he had better technology than Nicholas was. And so, you know, that system still made sense at a certain level. And so instead of ripping everything down, Lenin fairly quickly realized I can't just destroy everything and start from scratch, that we have to work our way there. And then, so yeah, that's why communism doesn't work. You know, it's like the guys get in charge and we're going to have a dictatorship of the proletariat. And then it quickly becomes, hey, it's good to be the king. So one of the things that AI really threatens is the conformity of our assessment systems, and how much we're trying to make everybody do the same thing. And it's real easy to get AI to do the same thing. And it's easy to cheat that too, by the way. And the thing I always go like, how do I know if this is written by ChatGPT or not? And I'm like, well, how did you know that some hack writer on Upwork or in some, you know, I don't know if there are any Russian essay mills anymore, but, you know, some essay mill didn't write this, right? I can tell the difference between ChatGPT and good writing. I can't tell the difference between ChatGPT and bad writing is the problem. And guess what most of my students do, right? So you really have to individualize things. You know, you have to make it about them because it's hard to fake being you. And also that has the additional effect of giving them meaning. Okay. I was listening to a podcast earlier this week, Phil Libin, who invented Evernote and has an AI startup studio now. He had this great quote, which is like, this is perfect. We've confused the ability to talk with the ability to think. And he says, the reason we give AI such agency is because it's a good talker, but it is not a good thinker, right? So the question we have to ask ourselves as teachers is, are our students robots? Are we training them to be robots? Are we training them to be good talkers and not good thinkers? And if our assessments are about talking and not thinking, guess what? The AI can do that already, right? So that's another way of thinking about the problem. And then what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish in this whole thing? What's the point of a college education? What are you trying to have people walk away from? I don't remember any of the content from my undergraduate years, or very little of it. What I do remember is an accretion of skills, an ability to manage learning, an ability to process information that I got in college, and I got doubled down in grad school. But do I remember what I learned in my American history class, my sophomore year? No. I mean, I guess maybe, but you know, by the way, PBS has this great Nova this week about memory and perception and stuff like that. It's a good view, but the thing they talk about memory is that the more times you regurgitate something, the less you remember it correctly. And so you always have to refresh your memory and so on and so forth. So the expectation that you're going to learn this content as an undergraduate or in college and then still have it when you're 40 or even 30 in any sort of useful way is kind of silly if you think about it. So what should we be teaching, right? So these are all questions that I think every one of us needs to ask ourselves. And this is where AI exposes vulnerabilities in the system, is because we don't ask these questions of ourselves. So what I have done in my classes is I've done a number of shifts, and I go through this in Learn at Your Own Risk, which is one of my own books, and I've rethought about grades. Grades are very pernicious to learning because people focus on that extrinsic motivator of the grade and not on the intrinsic motivator of learning something useful. And so what I've done is I've turned that extrinsic motivator into an incentive system rather than a judgmental system. And so basically, if you do a certain activity and the activities are structured to say, if you meet the minimum requirement is you're thinking about the problem in a certain way, then if you get that, you do that, then you get those points. And some points are easier and some points are harder to get in the class. And the higher up the Bloom's taxonomy you go, you know, those points are the ones that people tend to crash and burn on much more often. And then we have conversations about why didn't you think about this and that and the other. It's also a good way of doing formative assessment as well. A lot of the learning that goes on in my class and the assessment that goes on in my class is informal in the sense that I'm going over things with them, either in Moreau or a one-on-one, looking at their work. And I don't spend much time explaining things other than explaining how to do things, because my class is very skills focused. They learn content along the way, but they learn the content necessary to practice the skills. The goal is to learn the skills, and the content, yeah, they can always go back and find that again. That's the other thing about the world today. Content's everywhere. The problem we have is this: we don't have the skills to process it. If we're processing at the level of ChatGPT as an employee, guess what's going to happen? We're going to get replaced by ChatGPT. Individualized feedback, giving people meaning, saying you're not just a machine in the system, you're not just a cog in the system. We've got to get away from that. So, let me flip screens here. And again, let's see if it'll let me copy this. Damn it. I'll do this a different way. This is the linear nature of PowerPoints coming to get me. So, are
you trying to reach the sandbox, or?
Yeah, well, I can get to it. No, that's not a problem. I just wanted to copy it into the chat, and it keeps linking to, and I can do it. I can get the link from inside Miro. If I try to click on the keynote, it just wants to advance the slide. It doesn't look at that as a useful thing. Where is my Miro? There it is. No, that's Safari. There it is. Okay. So this is a tool I use a lot, and I just sort of threw this in here to get you guys play a little bit. It doesn't have any real purpose in this other than demonstration purposes. I'm going to drop the link in the chat real quick here. And okay. Okay. So just to show you some of the things. So this is a persistent aspect of whatever you're doing. So you can access this. You guys will be able to go back and access this anytime you like. So you can go, oh, well, what is, what was the thing, what was that reference that he made in there? So it's all right here. So this is an asynchronous tool, but it's also a synchronous tool. As you can see, everybody's floating around in here. I can see all these little bubbles. If people actually put their names on it or they're signed into Moreau, I can actually see their name, but it doesn't really matter. A lot of times I'll have people write their names in and so on and so forth. And I'll do exercises like this brainstorming exercise. This is one set up obviously for this group a little bit more, but how do you look at the old way of doing things versus the new way of doing? What are the pros and cons? You can have them fill that out, and you can see how people are thinking. This is the kind of stuff you used to be able to do in class, but you can still do it in class, but the advantage of this is that it's still there to go back and look at 2 days later. This is the Toolman method, which I use a lot in class to help students learn how to make arguments as they think through what they're trying to do. It's nobody breaks down arguments. It's remarkable how few people have ever sat down and done this. My class is set up as a challenge over the course of the semester. Every student picks their own challenge. I have to vet them to make sure that they're workable, but they pick their own challenge, and they do things like, how many, I can show you something from a participation one I did. Access to healthcare must be, I teach a government class. So access to healthcare must be improved. Higher education access should be improved. We should subsidize. These are examples of challenges that people have done in the past. They spend the rest of the semester, first of all, defining the challenge, which is a useful skill, no matter what you're doing. If you cannot define the problem you're working on, it's going to be real hard on you to work effectively. Then relating that back to various aspects of government, this one's a little bit more aligned to specifically around participation. So I've got some stuff in here about participation. And so I asked my students, so this is the data on participation. How does this affect your challenges? What are some opportunities? What are some barriers? And what are some strategies to overcome those realities? One of the things, for instance, young people don't vote. And a lot of the things my students want to see happen in the world are things that young people would want, right? And so how do you get around that reality? Is that you don't get the, if it comes down to a choice between paying for college or Social Security, who wins that one? Well, the people who vote do, and that's the folks over 65, right? So those are the kinds of questions that come up, and we work those problems, and I can see them thinking them through, and there's a lot of different ways. A lot of different boards I use in different ways. And so I'm watching my students work, and so I'm informally assessing them as we go through this. I also have individual meetings with all my students, things like that. And at the end of the year, at the end of the semester, they do produce a project which is summatively graded based on all the work that they've done over the course of the semester and put it all together. The idea is that they define the problem, they look for some solutions to the problem that other states have implemented, if we're doing like Texas or the state levels have implemented, and then they come up with 3 different strategies for navigating their way through the political system. They create a website. This is also a useful tool, thinking about communication and how do you create narrative and so on and so forth. So I want to make them better storytellers in ChatGPT. So yeah, okay. I've picked at a lot of things. I'm sure there are questions, but I don't know if I should. I guess I could. I don't know how distracting it is to look at the Miro, but feel free to keep playing around in there. I can see what's going on in the back. So questions, thoughts.
Thank you, John, for this wonderful presentation, and thanks for agreeing to present and the skills that you have. Wow, amazes me. The question I had, this Carnegie system that we had, right, from the 1800s, and now, where do you see ourselves in 20 years from now, and it's even 10 years from now, from the generic Carnegie system to now imposing these AI technologies?
Well, so I've been actually arguing for a long time that we need to come up with a much more authentic way of showing what a student can do. My class comes up with a work product that's theirs. They build these websites on the public web. They can use this portfolio that they've built over the course of the semester to show other people how they can do these things, how they can communicate narratively, and so on and so forth. We need a system to exchange that information. I actually wrote about that in the piece there's a link to it on the Miro, called somebody has made very big, called Thinking Backward, which the Current Issues in Education did published a couple of years ago. But basically the idea is that you create a system for cataloging artifacts of learning that really give you a much more complete picture of what a student can and can't do. And that can be a whole range of things that they have built. But we have we're not limited by a 4-bit computer anymore. So, we have much more robust ways of showing what we can and can't do. And maybe that's a video showing, something you've built in a physical object that you built, you've demonstrated that. Maybe it's video testimonials, maybe it's a debate you have with other students. I mean, there's a whole range of things that we could show to signal achievement that are not 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. That's a very crude way of showing what people are, right? And there's a reason nobody asks you for your transcript after your first job anyway. But those are the kind of things, and we could build the system. A system could be built that would show achievement along those lines. I think that has to come from the accrediting authorities at some level. That needs to be it could be a national system where the database is owned by the government or by, ideally by maybe the UN, because why does this have to be a US system? We are work in a transnational world. This could be used in a lot of different ways, by the way. One, you could get badges from universities to say this person built this object under the tutelage of this community college or this university or whatever, that shows tangible work product that, hey, we're showing our students how to do this stuff. And that's something that's a really hard thing to go, oh, you're just brainwashing them all to be liberals and giving them good grades and patting them on the back and sending them through. That's a lot harder to attack, because you can then show, hey, this is a real world skill that they need to know how to do. They need to know how to work AI. They need to know how to communicate in different ways, and so on and so forth. The other thing is, it could be an amazing recruitment tool. Think about how many students we miss because maybe I remember years ago reading an article back, this was at least a decade ago, if not more. Nigerians were taking e-waste computers that Dell was dumping in Nigeria and turning them into 3D printers.
Right.
And think about that for a moment. If I have a kid who's in Colombia or Nigeria or Poland or somewhere, or we're someplace where there's no that formal educational system does not translate well into the US system, and I want to recruit this guy to be one of my superstar students, and I can see, hey, guess what? This guy figured out on his own how to build this. I want him to come to my university. I'm going to pay him come to my university, or I'm going to give him a scholarship. I'm going to help him come here and add to that pool of knowledge, which ultimately is the mission that a university has for societies, adding to that pool of knowledge and adding that centrality. So you could use the system in a lot of very creative ways that we can't do with transcripts, because transcripts are an artificial language developed to signal things from one institution to another at basically semaphore level. I mean, think about it for a moment. You might as well be standing on a hill with a flag, right? We have so much more rich tools these days to create things. There's a whole range of ways in which this can go. As far as I saw Michelle asked about critical thinking. Yeah, absolutely. But critical thinking is a skill that's made up of a whole bunch of components. Digital literacy, being able to choose the tools you use, problem solving, all of those things are components of critical thinking. So yeah, but you have to break it down, I think one of the problems is critical thinking is a shorthand for higher level learning without really thinking deeply about all the different pieces that have to work together for someone to be a good critical thinker. And it's always a work in progress too, because I always have to remind people that 30% of the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th had college degrees. They were not good critical thinkers. So something was broken there. Either they didn't learn it, the colleges didn't teach it. I don't know what, but anybody who was a decent critical thinker did not go breaking windows on the Capitol building that day.
Well, the reason partly why it came to my mind was when you were talking about that idea of whether we've retained what we learned, like in our history class from sophomore year, when we're 40. And I was thinking, like, I mean, is that really what we as educators want our students to do? Because I don't think so, even though we may test on that content and everything. Really, I think it's about engaging with the material, right? Doing those critical things, learning how to think about those things, not necessarily the facts, whether it's history, sociology, physiology, whatever. So I was just sort of wanting to push back a little on that sort of assumption, that is, I think, what a lot of students and parents do think, that like, oh, what are you going to do that? You're not going to remember geometry, and how are you going to use that if you're not a mathematician? It's about what our brain does when we're engaging with that, and how we then get into the higher order thinking. And I think you agree, but I just wanted to sort of bring that point up as well.
Yeah, I think one of the failure points there is that we don't necessarily do a good job of relating that content to those higher level skills. Explicitly. I think it's implicit, and we say, okay, if you write a lot of essays, you're going to become a good critical thinker. That's not necessarily true. It depends on what the essays are about, for one thing. So I mean, I think that's the critical linkage. Everything in my class, I start with the skill, and I say, the reason you need to go read this content is if you're going to pass a law, you need to figure out how to get a law through the legislature. And don't just say pass a law. It's not that simple. So that's where the content comes in. You have to understand enough about the way the mechanism works to be able to critically think, how am I going to navigate what I want to see happen through the political system to make something actually happen, in the case of my class. But you can think of all sorts of different variants of that, right?
Thanks.
Yep. Right. Yeah, skills and competencies. The danger with competencies, though, is that a lot of times we equate that with specific job competencies. And there was that recent controversy over the president of Temple and the kind of things he was trying to do there, as far as his this sort of attitude. And this kind of leans the other way into higher education should just simply map itself out to what the employers want. I think that sells higher education very short. And again, I think it's a competitive disadvantage. There are much quicker ways to do that. And we're also assuming the employers know what they want. Can you honestly go to an employer and say, what makes these guys both have engineering degrees from the same school. Why is this guy a better engineer than this guy? They took the same courses. What's the difference? Right? Well, maybe they didn't take the same teachers. Maybe they got some different mojo from one teacher versus another, as far as there's a higher level critical thinking skills, how they approach thinking about things. That moment clicked in their head, and suddenly they're not just reading a textbook, they're thinking about the problem. And that's that. And that also, that again, we have to remember the word university. It's universe, it's uni, everything coming together, right? And we've developed instead all these little segments that, you're a biology student or you're a structural engineer. Don't pay any attention to what the chemical engineers are doing. I've actually had that conversation with someone before. And the famous joke about the two CIA agents running into each other in the halls of Congress, and they're like, shh, we need to be careful, and you don't know who's going to be listening. And they're like, what are you afraid about? Russian spies here? And they go, no, I'm afraid it's the FBI will be around. And so we think about that in our disciplines. It's the same thing. They should be working together, and these disciplines should be working together. And bureaucracy that's a whole other conversation. But we need to get much more. Technology forces holistic learning, and that's the other thing, is ChatGPT doesn't care where it gets its information from. It'll take it out of the engineering textbook. It'll take it out of the English. It'll take it from Shakespeare and mash it all together. I've had a lot of fun just asking really weird things. I had it write me a mythological story the other day, because we had a little bit of a celestial event 2 days ago, I think, where Venus passed behind the moon, and you could watch Venus disappearing behind the crescent of the moon. It was pretty amazing. And so I had this random thought about it. It was like, what would it look like if the moon ate Venus from a mythological perspective? I was looking at this as a Greek from 500 BC and thought about this. And so I said, ChatGPT, write me a story about the moon eating Venus. And it wrote me this wonderful story about how the moon got indigestion and that this was it could have been written by Edith Hamilton translating a Greek myth. It was that good. And that stuff is these weird mashups. I think a lot of people are missing that. These, trying to get it to do something weird and mash up things that don't seem to go together is something I think people, don't recognize. And humans are good at that, but we could use that to be better. Let's just say that.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much for your presentation. Jarek?
Yep. Alrighty then. So let's move on to the second part, if I may. Let me see here. Share my screen this time. So this would be right here. I'm going to share the sound. Here we go. We have collectively, we have developed, and this is year number 3 of our Friday SLO talks, and many of those topics that you've touched upon, Tom, are becoming part of, I don't know, loosely put, database of questions, concerns, topics to discuss, issues that we kind of go over endlessly, and we have put them all together for our discussion pleasure, so that we can have it all perhaps more streamlined. And you started your conversation with the industrial system of education, right? So again, Michelle, we touched upon the topic of critical thinking. So here's the question: within the existing structures that we currently have, and as you pointed out, mostly based on industrial age systems. What are the strategies that can more effectively cater to individual learning preferences and foster creativity and critical thinking? You mentioned that AI. I like really the bottom of one of your slides there, that AI is going to make us rethink our structures, our procedures, our systems. And that kind of like, leads me to this, even your example with this, with Moon and Venus, the issue of self-efficacy, that seems to be of greater importance than ever. We collectively, as individual human beings, need to have capacities to ask questions, to have this inner desire to solve problems, which we do. Where does the education come in? And we can start with Tom trying to answer the question, I guess, and then if we have follow-up questions in the chat, would be great.
Yeah, that is a big conversation. Absolutely. We have had our individualism drummed out of us by the educational system in many cases. I mean, we got to remember, and again, the industrial education system is training you to be part of a factory. And when I say factory, I mean that extremely broadly, in the sense that you may be in a factory that's producing automobiles and your job is to put doors on cars and things like that. Relatively few people doing that these days. Or you may be in a factory that's producing reports as an accountant working for Deloitte or something like that. It's still, we like to think of the service industry as post-industrial. It is to a degree, but in many cases it replicates the factory model. I mean, I've worked for architectural firms, and the model there is very much one of churning out product just like you would in a regular factory. It uses different sets of skills. It requires certain somewhat higher level thinking, although sometimes I wonder, but it's teaching you to be a cog in the machine. And that's definitely a view of education. And certainly it's a view that's very prevalent in K-12 education. Standardized testing assumes that view, that every cog takes the same test. And as long as you come out, you're a properly shaped cog and you can be put in the machine at that point. And that famous image of, I love using that image of Charlie Chaplin running through the gears of the machine and in modern problems is a great image on that. Because this is not how humans were built, but that's how we've been trained because the machines we were required to join the machine during the industrial age. Increasingly, we're not these days, in the same way that the rewards are for people who can think outside the machine. But
That's
our
right.
systems still teach people to think inside the machine.
Tom, latching on back to this idea of competency, right? You mentioned this, that the colleges should not become workforce training programs, right? Overall, universities, which is okay. I suppose it's a valid point. However, when I think about it, isn't everything that we do some kind of a vocation, regardless of the level of educational attainment? Teachers get master's degree. It's a profession. University professors do. It's a profession, right? I mean, astronomers with PhDs working at NASA, well, that's a vocation. Yep.
And again, I'm not saying that, but the thing that those people get, the ones that are successful, is very intangible and hard to measure. What I'm saying is, we should not spend all of our energy teaching people how to use Windows 11 or 10 or whatever version we're on, right? And instead, we need to teach people how to interact with technology as a way of growing, because the world isn't going to wait for you. And teaching someone to run a particular robot or machine, yeah, okay, you may want to do that, but the college, that's really not the role of the university. Again, I think we need to double down on those higher level skills, because I think that's something, and I will freely admit that I'm big advocate of the liberal arts education because it teaches you to think a lot about a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. And you need that level of intellectual flexibility to be successful in life these days. That's the premium skill. And the more we get away from that, the more problematic the less useful your education is going to be, especially over time.
Absolutely. Thank you for the answer. So anybody else, any more comments, questions? Let me see here. Agility, absolutely. Let's see here. The following question has, again, is a topic that you have already alluded to earlier. We are based on standards, on regulations, on rules and codes and accountability measures. What's up with that? We've been talking about the different learning styles, right? Individual approaches to education. That's what actually makes sense to students as the public that we serve. So considering that that the system prays for uniformity, students ask for individual attention. How do we reconcile this? How can we foster the more inclusive, more personalized education environment in the structure that you just described, based on Industrial Revolution? We are supposed to be creating diplomas, not necessarily thinkers.
Right. And I would say there's a couple layers to this. One thing is equity is not equality. Those are two different words. They mean two different things. If we force everybody through the same funnel and say, you have to go through these things to get to this end, that's equality, not equity. And we're going to lose people along the way because that's not an equitable system. It is a system defined by certain modes of operation. It's a system that is, again, made to, by the way, the students are not customers, they're product.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they really are. I mean, they may be paying tuition, although at a public institution, they're only paying part of what it costs to educate them. But they're not, I mean, yeah, they may be customers in the sense that they can choose not to go to college. But once, at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're telling society that we're producing a product that is useful for society. And, when we, again, Chris Newfield in his Great Mistake book points out that economists have analyzed what the impact of the great boom in university, college educated people that occurred after World War II was, right? And it was approximately 15% additional growth over what would have been the case without that education. But put your finger on exactly what that is. Good luck with that. I mean, the reality is we're putting people out. We want to put people out in there that contribute to and we can't predict how they're going to contribute. They could be the next Steve Jobs, who, by the way, didn't fit in the system at all, or Bill Gates, also someone who didn't really fit in the system. We're increasingly seeing people who don't fit in the system. I always like to point out that Einstein was a C student, right? And that's not because he was stupid. The C means nothing. The C was because he didn't conform. And the whole point to being a genius is not to do what everybody else does. It's to do what no one else expects. And so we all have to be more geniuses than was the case before. As far as just competitiveness within the economy. Now, there are other paths, but they don't require college. Maybe you decide that you want to, do farming or raise whatever, do other things that don't necessarily require a college education. The knowledge that do a lot of jobs, by the way, these days is not like locked up in a college anymore. I can find it on the internet. I don't have to go to college to learn how to be a mechanic, for instance. I may need to go to college to be certified as a mechanic. But then again, we're back to that whole certification thing again. And that's jumping through hoops.
So if you could please add a sentence or two here to the question of funding, right? How is higher education, at least publicly funded institutions, why, enrollment has been dropping for quite a while, right? Even in some cases before COVID. Why aren't we paying attention to learning, considering that seems to be a niche that's carved out by private institutions and others who are out there kind of like grabbing our students, as you are saying, why bother with college if that's a notion that's kind of like underlying the social change that we are experiencing here with ChatGPT and I mean, look at YouTube, right? If you want to learn anything, you can pretty much do it on your own. If you just have the capacity, enough time and patience, you can do it on your own. Yeah, why exactly. Aren't there efforts to address that?
I don't think people see the one problem is we don't all see the problem in the same way. A lot of institutions are focused on enrollment.
That's right.
And a lot of the funding mechanisms are based on enrollment. Quantity does not equal quality.
Yeah.
Another little okay. Okay. If you want student success by a measure, then make your classes easy. People will pass them. They'll look successful. If you want enrollment, make your classes hard. Because if I have to take government 3 times, that counts as an enrollment every single time. Right. And we get reimbursed for that student every single time. These are also games. These are also number games. I think one of the problems that we have, this goes up to the societal level, is that we need to start saying, this isn't about the number of students we have. This is about what our students ultimately do in the world and how they contribute to society. That's a lot harder to sell in a legislature and in terms of the way people think about these things. And of course, a lot of the legislators went to college and they remember what college was like in the 1980s. Well, yeah, it's probably still a lot like that, but the students are very different. In many ways, and the demands of the economy that exist today are even more different than they were. So
thank you, Tom.
Michelle, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I was thinking, I think you've touched on this in a couple pieces, and then to answer Jarek's question or to throw it in there, higher education has a public relations problem. And not, speaking to the DeSantis's of the world and the way it's under attack by parents and potential students and what's the value and all of that, we really and it goes back to that idea of it's more than just skills for a career, for a career or for your job, all of the things we're talking about, the meaningful learning. It takes us so much when we have the captive students already, they've bought in, they're here to convince them of the value and that it's not just checking a box and getting an A or what you need to do on this test, but all of that. So it's a lot of facets of it. The students who are in a room, the students who, are doubting whether they should go, their parents about the, and all of society and up to the legislatures, like you said. So, and I don't know that we've tackled that. Again, maybe because we're so focused on, we as an institution, higher ed, looking at the business model, the numbers, like how we're paying the bills and everything. But hey, we're not going to have those seats at all filled if we don't really do something on a broader scale to sell that value. And I think there's efforts a little bit here and there, but we're really losing that battle, I feel, especially.
Yeah, and I think the closest thing to a magic bullet there is on all of those levels is tangible work product. I think we have the technology to do that in a meaningful way now. It's something you can point to the students, and once they get used to it, then they're going to see the real benefit from it. The problem I have is I have trouble convincing my students that this is the thing they're doing is anything different than the final exam that I used to give and shove into a filing cabinet, never to be seen again. And that's a tough sell and something I have to do constantly. But if all my colleagues were doing it, then that would change the conversation at the institution. Not to mention, you would start building up a vast library of actual tangible work products that you could show people to verifiably demonstrate we're teaching skills that are useful in today's environment. And we could with a little bit of PR, we could draw those lines for them and say, hey, my student knows how to construct narratives, explain complex information in a way that other people can understand, can communicate visually as well as textually. And this is important when they start writing company reports, when they start building their future learning, when they want to be good citizens. Of course, a lot of legislators don't want them to be good citizens because they're good citizens are a pain in the butt, but you get the point, right? So this to me is the problem with it is the outcome is just too flimsy and amorphous when all we're talking about is a grade.
Yeah. And then on the societal perspective too, we're sort of a society of, holding up the exceptional. So we've got Steve Jobs never went to college. I think that's one that's proper, or,
Right.
So-and-so, right?
Yeah.
All of these, great people that people look up to, but they're the exceptions, but people want to, but they didn't get a college degree, and or then the entertainers, the folks who are the creatives who may have not gone to college either. And, these sort of what we hold up as
Right.
So I'm a sociologist, if you can't tell. So that's
I'm a
also
political
like, how do we
scientist,
battle
so
that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you don't. I mean, Steve Jobs created a tangible work product outside of college.
Yeah.
He also absorbed a lot from college, even though he didn't graduate.
Right.
He grazed in college.
Mhm.
And maybe that's what we need to look at, is a mechanism for allowing a lifelong grazing in college, where people continue to expand their universes. And again, this gets back to the demographic problem, in that if we're going to concentrate solely on 18 to 24-year-olds, we've got two layers of problems there that are going to slowly but surely strangle institutions. We've got to figure out a way to extend that out. And there's a lot of thirst for knowledge and context beyond college years. People get it. They fill that void with Tucker Carlson, who will explain everything to them.
Right.
Why don't they fill that void by going to a college or university? Because those same voices often discredit colleges and universities actively because they recognize the threat.
Yeah.
That's another way of thinking about DeSantis and others who are attacking
Absolutely.
colleges, is they recognize the threat.
Yes.
So again,
Agreed.
lean into that. Don't run from it. Lean into it. Say, okay, I don't want to teach you. First of all, the idea that we're somehow training everybody to be a bunch of left-wing liberals is crazy and doesn't hold up to any level of scrutiny. The danger is we're teaching people to be skeptical, and certain arguments or fairy tales or whatever you want to call them about politics do not hold up well to scrutiny. So
Agree. Thanks. Yeah.
critical thinkers.
Enrique, I see your hand.
Yes. Thank
So,
you.
Yvonne had a question on enrollments. I can't say for sure. Actually, I would think that decline in Europe is even worse because their demographic cliff is even higher. The difference is that, so compared to Europe, we're the only country in the world who has a true mass higher education system as a result of the post-World War II era. German colleges, I know Germany very well. I'm half German. I've lived there. I've gone to school there. German colleges educate a much smaller percentage of the population than we do here in the United States. That's a problem. It's a different problem. It's a different set of problems for them that they have to face because they need more people with those skill sets. A whole different conversation. There's a reason that we have a lot of foreign exchange students come here, is that they see that they would not have access to their own institutions in yeah, there you go, Benny, thanks. But there's a reason that people come here as well, is because it's harder to get into those institutions because they're very competitive. They're free, but they're hard to get into as a result. And so it's a multi-tiered, the system just works different too. So it's a hard question to answer, but yes, everybody's facing the demographic. We're actually less bad off than our European friends because we have immigration. And that's where most of our young people are coming from these days. And this is why I think it's hilarious that all these old white guys don't like immigration. I'm like, who's paying for your retirement? It's these people are going to pay. I mean, if you look at the data for, I live in Houston. If you look at the data for Harris County, Anglos are all like 60 plus, give or take, you know. And if you go below a certain level, it's overwhelmingly Hispanic. Well, those are the people who are paying the taxes that are paying for the services that you're going to expect when you retire. You know, you don't want to pay those taxes when you get to 65. That's why we have homestead and senior exemptions and things like that on property taxes. But that's a whole other conversation too. So, yeah, I agree. There's a lot of funding issues as well. We can't ignore that. But again, I think tangible work product and a way of sharing that. And again, we need a system for that. I think that's one thing that we brainstormed a number of years ago at Shaping EDU. There's some interesting projects going on there. I don't think people are necessarily thinking big enough on it, to be honest. We don't want to replace the current transcript exchange system that we have. We want to improve on it. We don't want to simply replicate it with pictures. We want to really think about that in a whole different transformative way. And again, that's something where the assessment institution, and by the way, you're starting to see this a little bit. I've forgotten the name of it, and you guys know because it's your assessment. We have SACs down here, but what's the Western? What's the assessment? Huh?
Oh, well, which one? University or the community college? It's a little different title, right?
The accreditation, or
yeah, the accreditation.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, it's
Western
Western
Association of Schools and Colleges. Yeah. Or
right, that's it.
It's even longer now.
I knew it's spelled a word. But a few years back, they started playing with requiring colleges to provide evidence of authentic work from students as part of their accreditation. And so this is where that pressure could come from, is if they suddenly said, okay, you want to keep accredited, you're going to have to show something more than an ABCD for all your students. And they're really kind of one of those leverage points within the system that I think people tend to overlook a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Nice. So this is a great segue. There's next slide that we have here is this, again, Tom, you've spoken about this time-based progression, right? That what counts, how much time you spent, not really what you learn. We are very good at counting time. We're just not very good about documenting learning. So how do we, considering that you're absolutely right, we can't just, put the whole system upside down and make change happen overnight with, no matter what the mandate would be. How do we transition to competency-based model or the transcript issue, faculty, workload, all these things that come along, right? Is it something that needs to help happen gradually? Kind of like, we haven't even started, to be honest. So what do we do?
So 2 problems with faculty workload. We tend to judge faculty workload based on classes.
Yep.
And generally it doesn't matter, you got the max enrollment. Well, my max enrollment in my classes is 32 students. Sometimes I have 30 students in my classes. Sometimes I have 12 or 14. It's a very different experience for the students if I have 12 or 14. Class size is something that really needs to be addressed if we're going to individualize learning. You cannot have, you can, but it's brutal on the faculty member. I have individual meetings with all of my students twice a semester, 15 to 20 minutes per student. And I schedule that. I do it on Zoom. I take a whole week out. I throw out all the regular class sessions and I say, we're just going to meet individually for this week. With 60 to 70 students, that's still manageable. But if I'm responsible for 180 students, that would quickly become a nightmare.
That's right.
So that's something we have to start looking real honest. Again, this is something that people need to lean on the administration about. I get paid per class. I should get paid per student. That's the other thing. The amount of work in a 30-person class versus a 15-person class is stupendously different, right? But I get paid exactly the same amount for the same class, right? That's stupid. And also we need to move towards smaller class sizes for that reason as well. As far as the time-based thing, yeah, I mean, my students need shorter classes and they need longer classes. And we should not, the amount of time on task, butts in seat. Yeah, we all know how effective a metric that is. I have students who are like, I was in class every day. I'm like, yeah, but you didn't learn anything. So
Right.
sorry, everything in my class is project-based. It's all building toward that project. If you go through the steps and you do the work, you don't actually have to be in class. The classes are there to help you do the work. So that's a very different way of thinking about classes. The biggest problem with community college students is there's life happens.
Right.
And there have been some very interesting models about having much shorter schedules, like a 5-week semester where you're only taking 1 or 2 classes. I lose a significant percentage of my students because their lives blow up in some level. I cannot manufacture their learning if they're gone for a month and come back and somehow expect to be able to play catch up. It just doesn't work. And that's why, again, this gets back to the whole, well, just give me the test. If I pass it, I'm okay, right? No, because the test just shows you how to pass the test. It doesn't show you to actually learn anything. Not to mention the fact that even if you learn something to pass the test, there's no guarantee you're going to remember it tomorrow. Matter of fact, I can pretty much guarantee you won't. There's a lot of psychology in that too. So this idea of time and credit hours, yeah, we need to develop a much looser definition. Again, that's something that's that's actually not that's a measurement system change. That's at the very low end of Meadows's leverage points. Yeah. So that's a relatively easy change to make. If we simply say, at the end of this process, you have to build this at this acceptable level, or this will be graded, assessed as the end product, and everybody's working toward that. If some students do it in 8 weeks, that's great. And some students take 20 weeks, that's okay too. And so you've got to come up with a way to pay faculty for those varying lengths of time again. But this gets back to the getting students through the
Results.
system.
Yeah.
And also it should be individual based.
Tom, you mentioned the accreditors too. They're a big hurdle there because they, I think, are still sticking strong to the credit hour, and we have to. That's a pressure point where we could work on to move this, to move the needle a little bit. And I would just wanted to real quickly too that life happens to students at the 4-year colleges too, for sure. Colleges and universities, even the it does. It's not just limited to the community colleges. Sorry, Enrique, I saw your hand. I'm sorry. I just want to throw it in real quick.
But it's easier. It's easier if you're higher up on the socioeconomic spectrum to weather those kinds of changes.
Yeah.
Not as catastrophic to your day-to-day existence. If someone goes in the hospital, you can hire a caretaker or something like that, right? So I don't know who was first, Benny or Enrique.
Yes. Do you feel that the for-profit institutions are doing this better? The credit, I mean, they're doing it. I mean, we're 18-week semesters, right? Some are 16-week semesters. So, I mean, as far as replacing the credit by hour or the time proficiency, how do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. It's not just a question of the time, but it's what you're using the time for. And again, a lot of the for-profits, a lot of the innovative startups are very, very focused on this competency-based education, but competency-based education targeted at specific jobs. And so, again, if they don't do that well, the student, it doesn't matter how many hours you spend on it. Completion is not completion of something as opposed to completion of a program. Those are two. We have to learn to separate those two things. And so we should have redefine what a completion agenda actually looks like. Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting time management things that the for-profits are doing, but they're getting mixed results, to be honest, as far as whether that really makes a difference. some of the more interesting approaches, I think San Jacinto, not San Jacinto, it's one of the West Texas schools, one of the community colleges, they have these 5-week sessions that only have 1 or 2 students, and they've actually have data that shows the completion rates go up because there's less if you crap out in one class, then or you have a bad semester, you've only lost 2 classes, and the bracket of time is shorter, so the chances of the bomb going off in that bracket of time is not as great as it is over a 16-week semester. The longer you spend in the minefield, the more likely you are to get blown up. So those 2 things there's actually some data that shows that those completion rates go up as a result of that. So I don't know. I certainly don't think the funding model for the private institutions really makes a lot of sense, certainly not from an equity perspective. So that's an issue too. We have to be willing as a society to say, hey, you know what? Having smart people in our society is a good thing. Fundamentally, that's what we have to get to. And that's what we were in the 1950s. We accepted that in the 1950s. For some reason, we've forgotten that. We had too many smart people and that became a threat, Go ahead, Benny.
Oh, thank you, Tom. So I'm just wondering, with this kind of topic, how about if we, instead of thinking about this kind of like very fixed time frame, set like, whether 5 weeks, 16 weeks, why don't we change it from totally a different approach, more like a subscription model?
Mm-hmm.
So you pay for
Absolutely.
subscription or whatnot, and then so sometimes, I agree with you. I've seen that they got sick, they are out for 2 weeks, they come back, it's pretty much impossible to catch up in a chemistry setting classes. But if you're more on a subscription model, then you have multiple entrance points, then maybe they can take a break, or if they have some content that they can master quickly, then they can move faster. Some competency level that they may need more time, they will have to spend more time to work on. Do you think that could be something that we should look into further? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be an interesting way of approaching it. Of course, the other thing that falls apart here is that we'd have to get away from adjunctification of education if you're going to have that flexible time frame. Because as an adjunct, I am an adjunct. As an adjunct, I get paid based on those 16 weeks. And when those are over, right, I'm working for free, and is that really right? And so that's a problem. Interesting model that I encourage people to look at. And again, I put a link to this on the Miro, one of the titles there. Look at the history of the Open University in Britain. It is the original model. They've kind of gone away from it a bit. But the original model was ahead of its time from a we could do this better now because of technology. They used to do this with television broadcasts, literally on the BBC. You'd watch a lecture but it's Douglas Engelbart talks about this thing called a networked improvement community, which is basically pods of learners, and then the content is coming from a central area. So you have the high level professor who is teaching 100,000 students, never sees them, but is the one who's providing the latest and greatest, the smart, absolute greatest content that's, the cutting edge. And then you have pods of learners with tutors who are assigned to 8 or 9 people as they make their way through the system that are independent of location. The idea behind the Open University was that they would provide a university level education across Britain where there didn't have to be a physical campus present. And so they would broadcast the content out, but then they would have the local groups doing the skills training, the skills work. And so you have these, and then you could, that would be in some ways easier to monetize than our current system around how do you pay those tutors and sorts of things, because you could pay them based on, and they would have a rotating group of students. When they get to this level, they get passed on to the next tutor or the next level or the next person or whatever. And then, you're getting paid a regular pay to be tutoring 9 students or 18 students or however many students, whatever the chunkification is that we think is economically. But then you have these very, these bubbles right? And they work internally, but then they're also connected to the other bubbles. And you can get larger groups together, do things together where you'd have, like in a science class, maybe all the tutors from the greater Manchester area get together to go look at the hydroponic farm at the University of Manchester as a field trip to understand what's going on in a real world, and that sort of thing. Those kind of things are, you develop a much more fluid and flexible system that's time independent, could be time independent. And in the case of the Open University, it largely was for a long time. It was very informal.
That's right. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tom. And again, this concept of life happens, I would like to take to the next level, so to speak, because it's true that we historically seem to be looking at what's happening in the classroom quite remote or remotely linked to our daily lives. There's always something that happens in our lives that's to our detriment. Therefore, we cannot continue our education. John Dewey and others have spoken about the importance of making learning relevant to what it is that students do in lives, right? I mean, there's the whole theory of andragogy that adults are pragmatic. They demand answers rather than being things imposed on them and being told what to do. What can be done in our, again, collective thinking as we try to envision and outline, where we should go next when it comes to building this on the issue of relevant education, instead of just simply remembering things for us to recall later for the purposes of assessment, but more focused on really solving problems. And again, this self-efficacy, because again, artificial intelligence is ubiquitous, is the fact of life now. We can't really assign homework how we used to, for example. So what do we do next? How can we take advantage of it?
Well, again, I get back to the whole, you got to make the creation of these projects real to the students, in the sense that you make explicit. And by the way, it shouldn't be just one professor. You could have multiple classes working together on the same projects. And you take a clump of classes, and scheduling becomes less of an issue because you have work groups and can leverage the knowledge that 4 professors have. I remember years and years ago, I was interviewing for a job at was it Southwest Michigan University or something like that. But they had this program where they had the students, they would take 4 classes on the environment, and one would be an English class, one would be a biology class, one would be a politics class, and one would be a history, something like, it was some combination like that. And these classes would all have interlinked content, but the students would explore the same issues from different vantage points. And the teachers all work together to come up with a joint curriculum that worked for all 4 of those. That was fairly early in the internet age, so to speak. That was in the WebCT age of LMSs, if you want to go back that far. The tools that we have now are so much more robust. You could do that much more independently of time. And also, I mean, we have Zoom. I mean, I'm talking to you guys from Texas. So if I have a class and there's an expert on my subject, or somebody who is a friend of mine who I know is particularly, would have a great spin on this to help my students, it's not a big deal for me to bring them in as a guest speaker, to answer questions, to talk, bring their expertise, to show something. We hardly ever leverage that, even within an institution.
That's right.
And this also gets into campus design, and you come up with a much more fluid, it's all more fluid. Technology makes us more fluid, but we have not anywhere begun to think about it in those fluid ways. And some of that's at a higher systemic level, and there's going to be a lot of resistance. There's an awful lot of money put into physical infrastructure. And I'm not saying we should get away from physical interactions. Absolutely the opposite. We have to be much more critical and say, this makes sense. We're putting people in the same place at the same time. We need to construct things so that can happen on the fly. But does it make sense for the same group of people to get together in the same place, the same 30 people to get together in the same place twice a week for 16 weeks? Probably not. So how do we do some of that stuff, right? Yes, and K-12, a lot of the interesting innovation that's happening in this area is actually in K-6, because they have less constraints in some ways. People really get broken in junior high school and high school. So anyway, but yeah, there's some interesting, we just need to think really fluidly, and I've got a bunch of models around that as well.
Sure.
That.
Yeah, those models are around. Really, the question is, again, why do we feel so strongly about preserving the current structure, this traditional,
It's a system. It's what we were brought up in. It's the reality we understand.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I mean, as scholars, as people who are highly educated, we should be well versed in thinking critically about ourselves and our systems, and we're not. We think about our disciplines much more critically than we think about our systems. And Leslie was asking a question about my classes. I have to give them a real grade because I operate with it. She was asking about whether it's whether I give an A or a credit. I have to give a real grade because I operate within the transcript system. At the end of the day, I have to give them a real grade. But I try to make that grade I don't get grade appeals, by the way. My students fail very transparently. It's because they don't do the work. If you do all the work in my class, you're probably going to get a C, and you'll learn something in the process. Most of my assignments, until I get to the final product, I tell them it's like going to the gym. You're going to work out. You're going to get some credit for going to work out, but at the end of the day, 30% of my grade is that final portfolio. Everything in that final portfolio, it's like going to the gym, training for a marathon. Okay, so we're going to do all this training. If you show up at the end of the semester and expect to be able to run that marathon, first of all, you're not going to do well. And secondly, I'm not going to give you credit for all the workouts you didn't do. So, that's another way of presenting it. So, but yeah, I have to give them regular grades, but usually they're very predictable.
Yep. Yes. The grades are, again, ubiquitous. It's part of the system. We can't. I mean, faculty cannot.
It's going to take time to undermine that. Yeah, it's going to take time to change that.
So that leads to the next question. What needs to happen? Let me just say one more observation here. I've been talking about SLOs for about 15 years by now, and I tell you the concept of a student learning outcomes has historically been, let's just say, discussed. As you know, many of those discussions were quite heated over the years in higher education, but the concept is really very, very much unknown outside of academia circles. And however, I tell you, just about 3, maybe 5 years ago, I started noticing that broadcasters, when I watch TV or listen to the radio, people do seem to be using the word outcome when they talk about education. So that's let's just say that perhaps that's a result of the discussions that we've been having, that there is some of it leaks out to the world outside. Gosh, but that seems to be like a very, very time-consuming, laborious process. Anything that we need to, Michelle mentioned, higher ed has a bad PR problem. How can we possibly think of how to switch the shift so that students demand of us, hey, I need these skills. I don't need the course.
Right. Well, I mean, again, I get back to tangible work product. The problem we have is that no reporter, and frankly, most of the people in our public relations offices have no idea what the connection between getting an A in a class is and the actual skills necessary to get that A. And guess what? It varies considerably from one class to another, as we all know. And so, and from one discipline to another. And so, that's that's that tenuous thing. It suddenly becomes a fantasy. These grades become fantasies. That is something people can wrap their heads around because they were in school one time too, and of course, Mama told me to go get an A, right? And we've been well trained in this. You're not going to be able to snap a finger and make those things go away. You've got to come up with an alternative that is slowly but surely more compelling. Say, yeah, you're going to get an A in this class, but this is what I tell my students all the time. You're going to get an A in this class, but an A in a government class, no employer is going to care about that at the end of the day. What they will care about is if you show them this website and say, hey, I know how to communicate ideas effectively. And now they're thinking to themselves, wow, okay, so I'm hiring this guy to be an IT technician, but maybe I can cut down on trouble ticket calls if this guy's writing up websites and creating things that the users will understand, that makes them not call in the first place, because then they know how to restart their computers or whatever, whatever the issue of the moment is. Communication is a skill that everybody needs, for instance. That's just one example, but you can demonstrate that. You can demonstrate your ability to think critically about problems, to break them down, to come up with strategies to solve them, and show that. Getting an A is simply, so what? I mean, that doesn't mean anything at the end of the day, certainly not to an employer.
Yeah.
It only matters until the day you graduate.
That's right. That's yeah. Well, you're right. It's sort of like,
I need this class to graduate. You can't fail me.
Yeah, that's right. That's the beginning of the end of the discussion. So just for everyone's attention, we are almost out of time, but I would like to, I have a couple of topics here. So the slides are going to be available, so you're welcome to take a look at points of our discussions that we would have if we had more time. But Tom, before we let you go, if you could please address the question that we've been pondering with greater intensity, probably as far as I remember since COVID time, and that is the equity. And how does this concept of competency and skill attainment play into this game? Because right now it seems like equity discussions are focused on, certain students are not progressing through our system. We can call it industrial age system. We can call it even repressive system. Grading, very bad for you. But our students of certain types of students are just not doing well enough. So we are going to make it more pleasant for them. On the other side of the spectrum, we have this issue of competency and skill attainment and data disaggregation, right? There's this SLO assessment data disaggregation question. What if we find out that there are certain students who think critically better than others, who are better public speakers and so forth? Why aren't what would this shift in the discussion do for us if in terms of equity?
So one of the greatest critical thinking tools I have in my arsenal is my love of Monty Python. And there's a scene in Life of Brian where he's addressing the crowd and they all think he's the Messiah. And he says, "You're all different." And one guy in the crowd yells out, "I'm not." Which, should make your brain spin a little bit, right? The problem is that a lot of students fail in the system because they're being forced to conform to a system that does not integrate with the way their lives work. Everyone has to get back to that funnel analogy. Everybody has to, yeah, exactly. Everyone has to go through the same funnel to get the college degree, because otherwise we're not doing it. We're not legitimately giving them a college degree or whatever. Well, there are certain student populations, and I can rattle off a long list of exceptions, right, that will struggle being smashed into the same cookie cutter system, which, by the way, is a cookie cutter system designed by old white men for other old white men, or for young white men, actually. Let me take that back. And so a lot of the features of our current system can be traced back to a time when the overwhelming majority of students in that system were well-off Anglo elites. This gets back to that whole elite college thing. the systems that came after World War II were patterned on the systems that were existing before World War II. They just scaled them. And they said, well, we're going to give Harvard to everybody. Well, the problem with Harvard to everybody is that the people who went to Harvard were not necessarily like everybody. They had all the advantages. They had tutors. They had, even relatively dumb by the characterization elites could make it through the system, several of which ultimately became elected president. But the reality is that that system was built for them, right? It wasn't built for women. What happens if you get pregnant in the middle of a 16-week semester, or you're I guess it's 9 months, so it's a little longer than a regular semester, but that can really have a serious detriment to your educational progress, because guess what? After you're pregnant, assuming you have the baby, there's a baby you have to take care of, right? So those things become a real factor. Colleges are not set up to deal with. There's people with the personal crises, the financial aspects of it. Is it a public good or isn't it? Is it a private good? Is it a public good? That's a question we've lost sight of. And again, this gets back to Chris Newfield talking. For about 20 years there, we believed it was a public good. We no longer believe that. We've been told since the beginning of Ronald Reagan that college is there to get you ahead, and it's about you and no one else. And the second we started doing that, where this larger idea of, look, go to college, figure out who you are, pull these things together, learn how to think, contribute something to society. That's what a public good is. It's not go get a business degree, go work on Wall Street and make $1 million. That's what college has become.
Wow.
That's certainly the way most of my kids think about it at some level. So yeah, we're not going to be able to fix the equity problem without really thinking hard about why the systems are that they are and the way they're set up that they are. So
Yep.
we're still playing the dead white man's game. We just don't realize it. No, the system goes back. If you look at the slides, and which by the way, I've put on the Miro now so everybody can see them. I just dropped them in there. But yeah, if you look back and you say, where did all this come from? Well, it started with a blackboard and scaled up there, and then computers made that more efficient. And then, there's a real through line there.
That's right. That's right.
We've got to unbuild that. You can't just wipe it away. You've got to come up with a new track.
Right on. Thank you very much. On that note, it's almost 12 o'clock. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Tom, it's been
Thanks
great.
for the great questions.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed
Thank you
it.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. I'm going to